Today was actually pretty interesting. The later parts of today, and it's almost nostalgic now that I'm thinking about it. But we'll get into that. As always, I want to start these conversations how we generally start them, with some mindfulness, so we're all present in the moment. Um, and we can get into that now. As always, 10 breaths, focus on your breath. I prefer your eyes closed, but if you don't feel like closing your eyes, maybe there's a lot going on. You want to always be aware and kind of sharp and looking out. Then you don't have to, but I'd prefer that you do. Starting now. Yeah, so I think it's a good time to do what we always kind of do next is just introduce a puzzle just to kind of get our minds going. And I'm thinking about one now. What fills a room but takes up no space? What fills a room but takes up no space? And as you think about that, I'll start telling you about my day today. It was interesting because the buzzer rang for the intercom. Somebody was at my door earlier today. I'm thinking it's a mailman, or like with an Amazon package, because apparently my household loves to order from Amazon. But I go and I respond like, "Who is it?" And then the guy on the other side kind of mentioned that, "Oh, I'm with the water services. We're about to turn the main line off. You're not gonna have water." And my first response was like, "For how long?" He's like, "I don't know. We're fixing something around the corner." As soon as he said that, I was like, "All right, thank you." And then I just went to filling up all the, the buckets, which I only had one, but all the pots, and any deep container that I had in my household. And I filled them all up like immediately. By the time, from the time he told me that to, I want to say maybe 2 or 3 minutes later, I had about 8, 9 pots and pans filled with water and one large bucket. And then a minute later, water was completely gone. And I thought about it. I'm like, why was that my immediate reaction? It was almost instinctual. And then I remembered that, if I haven't said it before here, which I think I have, I'm Belizean. I was born and raised in Belize. I'm from a small fishing village called Hopkins, but I grew up in Dangriga. And there's a lot of consistent things, but electricity wasn't one of them. And whenever electricity would go out, water would follow like immediately. So there was this thing where it happens as soon as electricity go out, we would quickly fill up tubs and buckets and whatever we can just to have water, because we don't know when it's gonna how long it's gonna be out for. And in that moment today, I was taken back to that moment as a kid growing up in Belize. And then just thinking about that, I realized how resourceful we were growing up. Ingenuity and inventiveness was a part of our normal. It was almost like it was second nature. And it's interesting why in that moment I thought about that. I made a connection and I did it. And it's, I don't know, it's since that happened, it's been maybe 5, 6 hours and we still haven't had water yet. But I have enough water for my family to do whatever they need to do before bedtime. So it was good, but it made me think about just this idea of, again, being resourceful and survival. And it kind of reminded me that creativity itself is just a tool, right? A lot of the times growing up, I didn't have much, but it wasn't like noticeable because, again, whatever I needed, I had, and I appreciated. And for the things I didn't have, I would makeshift or repurpose other things to have the things. So I never felt like I missed out on anything, or I missed something in particular. I guess I leaned on my creativity to kind of fill those gaps. But it's interesting because I believe creativity is a tool. It's always been a tool in my toolkit. No different than a hammer to a carpenter, or maybe wire cutters to an electrician, a stethoscope to a doctor. Like, that's how kind of synonymous creativity is to me in my own life. It is my tool. And I say it's a tool because if a tool is an object that extends our ability to perform a particular task or solve a problem, then that is exactly what creativity means for me. And I think back to like all the times where I leaned on my creativity. For a lot of my professional life, I had a title, or I have a title, where I'm an innovation consultant. And for what that would mean, I guess in my everyday existence, is people would call me, or organizations would call me and say, hey, we have a problem we need to solve, or we want to innovate on a particular feature or functionality that we have within. And I'll come clean now, and it's something I've never done before. I've never been this honest or transparent before. It didn't matter who called me or what they called me about. I never did any real research going into the meeting. I didn't study up on much. I just relied on my ability to be creative in that particular moment. And I was so certain that it would always be there. Like, I trust my creativity more than I trust myself. And that's interesting because creativity is a part of who I am, right? Of course it's there. But I got so comfortable. I felt like I could tap into it whenever I wanted to. It was there. It was my hammer. It still is my hammer. And I would walk into these meetings, and I told myself the only time I would ever try to prepare for a meeting is if I went to one and my creativity failed me. Then the next one, for sure, I would prepare. But like I said, it never failed me. And for me, a lot of the times it's just empathy, putting myself in the position of a lot of these people and their particular problems, and then allowing myself to kind of assume that role, and again, just leaning in on this idea of just reaching for my tool and let it showcase itself. But it took practice, as innate as creativity is to human beings and to myself. Before I could trigger it organically, something had to trigger it. And for a lot of the times, it's the problems that these organizations or these individuals were facing that forced me to kind of tap into it. As I got older, I didn't need necessarily a problem to get me to want to be creative. It just became my normal. So as I would move around, it would just happen. Sometimes when I least expect it. And maybe you've experienced it too. Have you ever been maybe walking somewhere or looking at something and you thought it was something, but then you doubled back and you looked, it was something else? But then when you think back to what you originally thought it was, you're like, damn, that was a great idea. Why wasn't the thing I saw the thing I thought it was? That's your mind using its creativity and its ability to make a connection and expand upon that connection to formulate this thing. And that happens to me a lot. I don't know if you're conscious of it, but I'm sure it happens to you. And that is your creativity organically doing what it does. And for me, a lot of the times when I walk into these situations where I have to use my tool, it is that thing, but it just happens faster and on command. And I don't want to take that for granted. And I'm saying that as if though it's like this easy thing that I could just call upon whenever. And as much as it is, I don't necessarily take it for granted. There hasn't been a time where my creativity, where I didn't have my hammer. But I've always felt like it's with me. So it's like, it's just saying, it's like, it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. So consciously or unconsciously, I always carry it with me. And that's kind of how I take on the world. It reminds me, going back to this whole idea of like growing up and what my childhood was like. There was a show, I don't know if it's still running, if they rerun episodes, MacGyver. But the main character, he'd find himself in situations, and he would always figure it out like using some form of like, oh, I could take this and it always started, for some reason in my memory, it always started from a toothpick. Like you would take a toothpick and then make a Swiss Army knife out of a toothpick. But that's how I see myself. For a lot of the times, it's like taking that toothpick and making it into a rocket ship. And I guess for the most part, that's how I visualize, I visualize my creativity. And I'm saying that in the sense where in a professional capacity, that's how I've been using it. But there are instances where creativity is more than just a tool. It's a survival tool, right? It's needed more than ever. And the last few weeks, there's been a lot happening around the world. There's this potential threat of war, and there was an earthquake in New York City. There's flooding. There's all these things, and there's all this chatter around something is happening and it'll happen soon. Are you built for surviving this? And I've never, even hearing those stories as close as they come to home, I've never feared that thing happening. I could swim. I know how to defend myself. I've done a really good job of preparing my family if ever something were to happen. But you never know, right? As much as you've prepared, you never know what truly can or will happen. And that unknown makes me think back on these meetings I used to attend where it's like you can't really prepare for it as much as they can give you a forewarning or a heads up or a briefing prior. You never know what's truly going to happen until you're there. And because I trust my creativity, and I've said I trust it more than I trust myself. Because I trust my creativity, I don't fear whatever could potentially happen. I think it'll it'll be my survival tool uh, to find creative ways to preserve life, um, to turn, if it's a flood, to turn a toothpick into uh, a raft. Whatever it is, I always say, like, there's two things I hope I could gift my kids, or at least a skill that I would want them to to hone. One is self-awareness, and the other is a deep relationship with their creativity. And I think with those two things, if I can give them that, or at least help guide them down that path, I feel like I've equipped them well enough to survive. Um, Now you can argue that there's tons of other skills that you can give your kids, and I think, I'm not saying it's wrong for them to kind of learn those things, and there's so many other things that I'm teaching my children, and I'm hoping that they learn. But if I can, I'll be comfortable if I know that they are self-aware and they know how to tap into their creativity. Because I think with creativity, it doesn't matter what obstacle it's in front of you. There's always an opportunity. There's always a way. And if you trust yourself and your ability to tap into it, I think that way is gonna show itself. And it's on you to decide, all right, am I gonna go with this thing? Am I gonna trust my gut and my ability, or am I gonna panic? It is in fact a survival tool. It's shown itself to me in multiple different ways. And I'm pretty sure if you think back of your own life, right? The things that you've experienced, and maybe things that you've made your way out of, situations that you've made your way out of. I'm pretty sure you can think back or kind of pinpoint it back to, there's some luck component. I don't necessarily think anything in life is a coincidence. So there's luck, certain things you were prepared for, but there's been circumstances where you made a way when a way wasn't present or wasn't obvious. And I think your creativity has a lot to do with that. Now, how can you build your confidence up to know that that tool is always there whenever you need it? I think as with anything, you practice that, right? You practice that skill so well that, or so often and so frequent, that it becomes second nature, right? You don't even have to think about it. I think I'm there. If I'm not there, I'm almost there. I know how to get to my creativity when I need it. It's on speed dial. It's within reach. It's always there. It's ever present. And I want you to have that same level of confidence in regards to being able to access it. And I think that brings a lot of peace of mind. But again, this actually takes practice. How do you practice your creativity? We talked about how there's certain constraints that will trigger it, either our circumstances. Necessity is the mother of invention. So in our everyday lives, there's certain things where it's like, I mean, we're all lacking in some capacity. And figure out where those shortcomings exist, and see if you can find ways to work around them or work through them. But it's in a much simpler, less complex way. I think there's opportunities for you to just challenge yourself, right? The things you do normally, try to figure out an alternative way to go about doing it. Get your brain to figure out substitutes. I think that's a good way. Just if you have something that you usually use to do something else, see if you can identify another thing that can give you that same function and give the same result. And keep doing that. Every day, pick something that you do normally. And if we want to tie it into like survival, think, all right, I usually brush my teeth with a toothbrush. What in my household, in the event that I don't have a toothbrush, can I use to brush my teeth? How do you, when you're eating, if you don't have a fork or a spoon, whatever you choose to eat, what around you can you use? Or can you make something else? Can you find something else that's another utensil that's kind of there, but you never thought to use it as a spoon? And do that exercise as frequently as possible. You'd be surprised at the things that show themselves as tools. And to be honest, a lot of the tools that we have within our kitchen are innovations. They're not necessarily needed. They're convenient. They make life easier. For a long time, I had and this was can opener. For a long time, I had a can opener, and I never used it because every time I needed to open a can, I just grabbed a knife, and it took me a while for me to put the knife down and grab the can opener and open a can of anything, a can of beans, with a can opener. It was still foreign to me. And I learned, just seeing with my kids, they were raised in this modern world, like things that I do that they look at me as if though I'm this crazy person because I do certain things a certain way. But if there is ever a time where all the amenities and the convenience are no longer there, are you prepared to live a life without them? There is, in fact, a lot going on. And it's you just look around. There's just so much going on, and you can never necessarily be too prepared. But I think you can be underprepared. So all these other tools might get a little bit heavy. Your backpack can only hold so much. Your utility belt can only hold so much. All your cargos and multi-pocket clothing can only hold so much. The beauty about creativity and the survival tool that it doesn't take that much space. Matter of fact, it doesn't take any space at all. And I'm not saying you're not gonna need that Swiss Army knife. You're not gonna need that flashlight. You're not gonna need those batteries. What I am saying though is, if you find yourself in a situation when they're not readily available or they're not working, if you lean on your creativity, I think it can get you through. Going back to the riddle from earlier, what can fill up a room and take up no space? Light. The answer is light. I think that's where we're gonna end today. Don't take your creativity for granted. Take it with you, just in case you need it. It's better to be caught with it than without it. Good night.